Hey guys, Brandon Productions here, and welcome to yet another Visual Basic .NET tutorial. In this tutorial, I will be using Visual Studio 2010 Professional Edition in order to accomplish our task at hand. So, a widely requested tutorial has been how to use properties within a Visual Basic .NET application. Of course, the users have not actually requested how far they want me to go with this properties tutorial, but I'm going to take it as far as I think actually needs to be taken. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So properties are essentially these variable types that, well, even if you don't know it, you know what properties are if you've ever coded in VB.NET before. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. Let's go ahead and dive right into a Windows Forms application. I'm going to name this Property Tutorial. If you didn't know yet, this tutorial is going to be on properties. So once this form is created, my Visual Studio is deciding to go slow. Anyway, once this form is created, we could actually go ahead and look right at the properties that this form has. So as you can see, it has a build action, a copy to output directory, a custom tool namespace, and a file name. All of these are properties of the form. Well, actually, those were properties of the project. The form has all of these properties that you can actually mess with. So you can see right away that these are properties are very prevalent within VB.NET. Now, one of the main concerns is when you're creating your own custom objects, you may want to create your own property. So if a user drags a custom control onto the form, they can just slide over to the properties window over here and go ahead and check out the control's properties. However, this is not accomplishable in a simple manner. You must do a specific thing in order to get the properties set up. So what I'm actually going to do is we're actually going to make our own button. So let's go ahead and get started. So in order to actually add our own button to a form, or in order to actually make our own button control, we're going to have to right click on my project here, or property tutorial rather, and then press add and new item. Now from this new item list, we are able to add a bunch of stuff, and since I'm using the .NET 4.0 framework, I have more stuff than is usual here. If you were using the .NET 4.5 framework, you would have even more stuff. But we're just going to go ahead and add a user control. Actually, we're going to go ahead and add a class. So this class is going to be an extension of the regular button object. However, it's going to have a few other properties that can actually be edited. So I'm just going to name this tutorial button. So now that we have our tutorial button class, the first thing we want to do is actually make it so it inherits the Windows button, so it actually appears to be an actual button. So in order to do that, we can simply type inherits button. And then once we're done with that, we can actually jump back into our class here, and you can see that it is now a component, and we're going to have to click here to switch to code view. So when any button is created, or rather when any button is slid onto the form and you click on the button, you get a default set of properties. What we're going to do is we're going to actually add our own properties to this button. So when the button is clicked, what we're going to want to do is actually display a message box. However, the text of this message box is not editable without actually accessing the code. So we're going to make a property that actually contains the string that the message box will display. So the first thing we need to do is create a private variable that actually contains this. So since this is the button class, we're going to create a variable that can be used throughout this class in any method or function or whatever you would like to call it, or subroutine rather. But so we're just going to go ahead and get started and create a private variable. So we're going to say private, and we're going to call this variable message string. Now in VB.NET, the classic style is all private variables, or all private global variables, also called instance variables, are to have a underscore in front of them. And you'll see why in just a second. So we're going to name this one message string as string. So now we have established our private variable. But this private variable, since it's private, cannot actually be touched by any other class. Now this is where properties come in. So we can actually make a method public 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 sub click. And when this click sub is actually, well, actually we can't name it click because click coincides with other methods. So we're going to call this button click. There we go. So this is what we're going to actually execute when the user clicks on the button. And when this happens, we are simply going to display a message box that contains the message string private variable. So if you don't know anything about coding and you simply wanted to drag this button onto your form, you wouldn't know to actually dive into the code of the control and change the value of this message string. So we need to make this value actually accessible to the button itself without actually making any code, without actually having the user to dive into any code. So this can be done using properties. So we are going to create a property that correlates with this message string variable. So what we're going to do is say public property, because this is the correct syntax, and then we just need to name our property. So we're going to name this property message string. And then we still need to declare what it is. So the message string is a string, and then we can go ahead and press enter. Now, the property declaration is actually sort of a block. So by a block, I mean it is a section of code. So inside of this block, of course, each block of code actually has an end statement. So since we're creating a property, we also are going to need to end the property with this end block statement. Now there are a few portions of the property block. The first one is a get. So when you need to access this property, there's two things you can do. You can either get the value of the property through code, or you can set the value of the property through code or through the actual editor itself. So we need to declare what happens when we do this stuff. So let's go ahead and set up a get. So if we type in get and then press enter, VisualBasic.net automatically generates the rest of the property block that we need. If your Visual Studio or Visual Basic does not do this, you can go ahead and manually start a get and get block and then a set and set block. But it should automatically add these in. Now at this point, all you need to do is declare what you want these to do. So a little bit about these functions. The get is actually a function that returns whatever type of object your property is. So this get function here returns a string. So classically what we want to do in the get function is we want to return our string. Now since this is a message string property, we don't want to be returning the property. We want to be returning the string that the property correlates to. So we're going to go ahead and return the value of message string. Now same goes for the set value. This is actually a subroutine in which the value as string is a parameter. So the user is actually, or this is actually called whenever the user says, like in code, equals. So they can actually call the set value without, or the set method without actually calling the set method. So in this case, all we want to do is use the value parameter as a base and set our message string variable to the value. So we can do this by typing our message string variable equals value. And now we have our first property block set up. So we've got a button that has a private variable, message string, and a property to correlate with that private variable with its proper get and sets. And then we have a button click method. Now all we need to do to make this button click actually work with the click is we can say handles me.click. So this is another sort of convoluted thing of VB.net, the handles statement. So anytime you want a method to actually be called when an action or event occurs, all you need to do is type in the handles. So you could say handles, and then as you can see, me dot, and then anything that occurs with this button, you can actually call this method with. But since this is the button click method, we want to stick this with me.click. This is also can be done manually through the add handler statement, which we can explore in later tutorials. So now we have our tutorial button object complete. So now if we jump back to our form and we actually save the project, so we press File, Save All, and then press Save. And then we also build the project, so we press Build and Rebuild. We can go ahead and look in our toolbox, and there is our actual object, the tutorial button object. So we can go ahead and just drag this onto our form, and as you can see, it looks just like a regular button. Now this is because it is inheriting the regular button class of VB.net. All we did was add a little extra functionality to it. So let's go ahead and check if our property worked. I'm going to go ahead and drag the properties window right below the button so we can see this clearly. So if we click on the button window, or on the button itself, the properties window changes accordingly. And we actually have the classic button properties, so the text, I'm just going to change the text to click me because I can. And then we are also going to look for our property that we created. And it is right here, message string. So now what we need to do is, this would be calling, when we type something in here, it calls the set method of the property. So we can actually type something in here. So hi, YouTube is what I'm going to type because I'm saying hi to you guys. And then, so when this button is clicked, our code tells it to display a message box with this string inside the message box. So we can actually test that out now by pressing the debug button. And then if we press click me, it displays a message box saying, hi YouTube. So without even altering any of the code and just altering the properties, you can see that we can change this message. Now there are a few types of properties, especially ones where you can actually select things. So for example, this property right here, dialog result, is a drop-down menu or a combo box. So you can select between none, OK, cancel, abort, retry, ignore, yes or no. Now if you'll notice our property here, it's actually a string. Well, that's because it all depends on what your property is. If you set your property object to be, for example, a location or a size, if you set it to be a size, it will automatically create itself like this. If you set it to be a padding variable, it will automatically create itself like this. If you set it to be a Boolean, you can either set it to be true or false, like tab stop here. However, what if you want to have your own objects? So for example, what if you want it to be like, what were we looking at before? I don't remember what we were looking at before. Were we looking at, okay, we could just say flat style. So what if you want it to be like flat style? Oh, we were looking at dialog result rather. So what if you want it to be like dialog result, where it's a drop-down menu of a bunch of custom options? Well, this can be done when you combine our knowledge of properties that we've just established with our knowledge of enums, or enumerations, that were actually established in a previous tutorial. If you haven't seen that tutorial, I suggest you go watch it now. Otherwise, you may be lost, but you may not. So let's go ahead and pop the property window back and jump back into the code of our tutorial button. So far we have a message string property, which is a string, but we're just going to go ahead and delete the this property. And we're going to go to work on an enum. So what an enum is, or enumeration, is it's simply a congregation of different objects that are assigned an integer value. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an enumeration here with different style objects corresponding to different messages. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we can actually say enum, and then we're going to name this enum message string. And this message string is going to be a string. Now, inside of this enumeration, we need to declare a few objects that actually have numbers assigned to them. So we can go ahead and do this by typing in oh, I think we may need to do this. Oh, okay. So we can't name our enumeration message string because we've already got a private variable named message string. So we're just going to call this message identifier. Okay, so that eliminates that. So now let's go ahead and begin typing in some enumerations. So we're going to have an enumeration called greetings, and we're going to set that equal to 1. Let's have an enumeration called goodbyes, equal to 2. Let's have one equal to, what other things do you say to people? A warning message, and we're going to set that equal to 3. And how about a last one, a declaration message, equal to 4. Now, right off the bat, you can see that we have some errors. For example, this string says the enums must be declared as an integral type. Well, that is because string is a very complicated object. So what we need to do is we can only declare objects as bytes, integers, longs, short bytes, and shorts, and u integers, u longs, and u shorts. So we're actually simply going to declare this enumeration as an integer. So now we actually have our corresponding integers set up with our enumerations. So now we actually need to alter our button click method a little bit. So instead of simply displaying a message box with the message string, we need to actually alter the message string a little bit in order to reflect our enumeration that is selected. So we can do this by creating a new method. I'm going to call it private sub alter message string. And inside of this sub, we're just going to change the message string variable according to what our enumeration is. So we're going to say, and actually, we need to change this private variable from a string to a message identifier as message identifier. So now we have a custom enumeration object up at the top here. So we have an enumeration instance variable. And we can now say, and we're actually going to make this a function that returns a string, and we're going to name it getMessageString. So what we want this function to do is return the appropriate message string according to the message string identifier. So we're going to say if message string equals, and now we have our option of message identifier.declaration, goodbyes, greetings, or warnings. So let's start with declaration. So if message string equals declaration, then we are going to return of independence. As you can see, that's a little bit of humor flowing around, since the Declaration of Independence is a famous United States document written in about, I don't know when it was written. Anyway, so now we have the option of actually checking our other enumerations as well. So we're going to say else if message string equals message identifier dot goodbyes. So if the user instead selects that the message should display goodbyes, we are going to return, it has been a fun time, but I must leave you. Semi-sophisticated. So else if the message string equals message identifier dot greetings, then. So if the user says that we need to display a greeting, we're going to return salutations, my good man/woman. And finally, if the message string is what is this? A message identifier dot warning, then we are going to return back off. You have no business in this area. So now we have an appropriate get message string function that returns the appropriate message depending on our enumeration. So once again, we have an enumeration here that has greetings, goodbyes, warnings, and declarations. These integer values do not matter. This is done internally in VisualBasic.net, and all we need to worry about is our handling between message string and all of its according variables. So when the button is clicked, we are just going to want to display a message box, and the message box text is going to be retrieved from our get message string function. So now finally, what we need to do is assign a property to our button that relates to these message identifiers. So we can say public property, and call this one message string again, except instead of being a string this time, it needs to be a message identifier. So now that we actually have our message identifier property here, we simply need to fill in our get and set blocks. So let's go ahead and do that. So when you're trying to get the message string, you are simply going to want to return our message string variable. And when we are setting our message string, we are going to want to set message string equal to the parameterized value. Now, as you can see, we have a single error here. This is message string cannot expose type message identifier outside the project through class tutorial button. I think what this means is that we need to move our enumeration inside of the class. Yes. So our enumeration had to be inside of the class instead of outside the class. But now we have an appropriate button that has its own enumeration and its own getMessageString function, which this we do not really need to worry about. That was just for the functionality of our program. But now we have a property that will have its own drop-down box. So it's going to have the option of greetings, goodbyes, warning, or declaration. And all of that is done by setting the property to the value of our enumeration and having a private variable that actually reflects our enumeration. So let's go ahead and test this out. So we're going to jump back to our form here and actually rebuild our project. So once that's done, there will be an error. I don't know why. There is these errors. Let's go ahead and jump back to our code on our class, and then jump back to our form, and we see this error. Object of type system.string cannot be converted to property tutorial button plus message identifier. Let's ignore and continue this warning, and go ahead and delete this button from our form and rebuild the project. And so as you can see, the problem was because we were trying to update that button with the properties that we already had enlisted in the button, which we couldn't really do. So let's go ahead and drag a new tutorial button on the form, and then drag the properties window below it for visibility purposes. So once again, I'm going to change the text to click me. And as you can see here, our property message string is now a drop-down box. So now we can choose between our 4 enumerations: greetings, goodbyes, warning, and declaration. So let's go ahead and test this out by actually choosing the goodbyes option. Now if we debug our application, we can press the click me, and it says, it has been a It has been a fun time, but I must leave you. Which is, of course, the code that we put in for our goodbye enumeration. So let's go ahead and switch the option one more time. Greetings, and if we press click me, it says, salutations, my good man / woman. Which is exactly the code we instated for our greetings option. So that is how you use properties within VisualBasic.net. Essentially, properties are a way for other objects and the user to edit things about custom objects. So in this case, we created our own version of a button, and we had it display certain things when we clicked on the message box. You can do this with all types of buttons, and all types of objects rather. You can create your own versions of them, reinstate your own properties, and go ahead and set them up accordingly. We could have created a property about a style, and through the code set the forecolor, backcolor, border style, and all of that. But I tried to keep it simple by just simply displaying a message box, which everybody knows really how to do in VisualBasic.net. So thanks for watching this tutorial on how to use properties. You now know how to use basic properties where the user simply types in a string. Now keep in mind that that basic property could also be used with a string, an integer, a char, or any other type of variable. But when you actually want the user to be able to select from a list, that is where you have to use enumerations. And these enumerations will correspond with other parts of your code. So thanks again for watching this tutorial. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And please leave your feedback on this tutorial so I can improve on anything I've done wrong. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace out.